Kia ora and welcome to Wellywood Wargaming. In this series I'm going to be doing book reviews for specifically Black Library novels for Games Workshop. Now I've read many books in my life. I'm a big reader. Some of it is highbrow literature, some of it is stuff like this, which is completely the opposite. But Black Library has always been a guilty pleasure of mine, and I'm going to hope to do lots and lots of book reviews. Of course, these book reviews will contain lots of spoilers, so if you haven't read these books, you might not want to know exactly what happens in them. I'm going to be going through the plot and kind of dissecting them a little bit. I won't do it in too much detail, but I will give you a sort of general overview and my rating at the end of it and how good I think the book actually was. But without further ado, we're going to get into this particular one, which is going to be a Necromunda book. I was asked recently if I've read many of the Necromunda novels that are out there. I have read a few of them. But this one I've just finished yesterday, and it's called Terminal Overkill by Justin D. Hill. So, Terminal Overkill. What does the title mean? Not really sure. Does it even have any relation to the book? Don't think so. So yeah, the title doesn't seem to match the book. However, there is certainly a lot of overkill in it with the body count in this book. But anyway, just a reminder, spoiler alerts here. I'm going to be going through the plot now. Just in sort of skimming over it really, but this book is pretty much an Escher book. It's a House Escher book. The main character is an Escher Juve, who is the identical twin of an Escher male. So a female and male set of twins here. The male Escher twin, if you're not familiar with the Escher lore, is perfectly fit and healthy, which is very rare and unusual in House Escher. And the mother is the gang leader of the most famous gang in that part of the hive. Now, the mother herself I find immediately annoying. She's not a character I like. She's very corny. She just does karate kicks and blows the smoke away from gun barrels and stuff, and doesn't seem particularly engaging. She's quite cold, and you know, obviously the main character Brielle looks up to her a lot, and pretty much the first part of the book is all about Brielle looking up to her mum and watching her mum lead this gang of incredibly cheesy and corny named Escher with punk hair and piercings and tattoos. And I don't know what it is. I think it's just my aversion to House Escher. I don't know what it is, but I just feel like the Escher in this book clearly are written from a very male perspective. They don't feel genuinely sort of female, or they lack a lot of depth, I find, but mainly the names and the descriptions of some of the characters are just a little bit corny for me. Moving on though, it starts to get very interesting when Fetnir, who is the Goliath sort of tyrant in the area, starts becoming very powerful, and no one can figure out why. He's basically a really smart Goliath. The Goliaths are painted as being incredibly dull, boring, dim-witted and brutish, which is kind of true in the lore, but they lack any sort of depth as well. However, this Fetnir, the leader, is obviously very calculating and very intelligent, and he starts taking over areas of this hive, which the Escher are part of. Inevitably, what ends up happening is that the Escher fail to sort of collaborate with one another. The different gangs are sort of falling out with each other, and they pretty much all start getting killed off by Fetnir's Goliaths after a sort of Goliath civil war, and he becomes the sort of overlord. Anyway, so moving on, what happens then is that Fetnir obviously sends a bunch of hired scum and bounty hunters into the Escher sort of camp, and they abseil in and pretty much kill everybody, including Brielle's mother, by shooting her in the back of the head in front of her. So as soon as this sort of introduction period ends, things start getting very interesting, and the book actually starts to open up into some really good stuff. So Brielle escapes while these hive scum are sort of attacking her settlement, killing her mother, killing all the Eschers of that gang, or pretty much most of them anyway, in the process. One Escher named Black Eye, which is a terrible name, is brutally eaten by a pack of rats and a beastmaster, which is described in very gory detail and very good. I don't know what it is, maybe I'm just very dark, but I really enjoy very well depicted violence in books. I don't know what it is, but yeah, basically a giant rat pack pulls this woman apart while Brielle has to run into the Underhive and try and survive in the Underhive. Now, in the process, her twin brother who she's escaping with also dies. So all of a sudden you've got a very George R.R. Martin sort of killing off of all of the main characters except for one, which I actually quite like. It's completely merciless and brutal in that sense. And I quite like the twist of her brother getting shot. I really thought that the Escher brother was going to be a mainstay in the book, and I'm glad that he wasn't, actually. Anyway, so Brielle, or Bree for short, ends up being alone in the Underhive and chased by rats and giant spiders. There are a fuck ton of giant spiders in this book. If you are arachnophobic, then probably don't read this book, because it just is full of spiders, basically, and rats. And spiders and rats, it turns out, don't like each other very much either, so when she's getting chased by these rats and spiders, they end up fighting each other and she gets away. But this is where the book actually starts getting really, really good. There's a big scuffle between rats and spiders and her caught in the middle, and it's really descriptive, it's really dark, and it's really quite scary as well, to be honest. It does not pull back its punches at this point, and I've got to say, there are some really, really good moments in this part where she's escaping. It's really dark and nasty, and it's really well described, like I said. The spiders are kind of described as sort of stinking of death, you know, and decay and stuff, which is quite cool. I always imagined spiders to have a sort of stink to them if they were larger than they are. Anyway, she ends up following some signposts in the Underhive and becoming captured by a really odd couple that are straight out of The Hills Have Eyes, an ex-Orlok couple who had escaped and started their own little kind of farm, basically, in the Underhive. Now, the man, the husband, is just a redneck with a shotgun, and the wife is a really, really interesting character. She's terminally ill and sort of dying, and she's on this life glug sort of blood pump machine, and she's just disgusting and clearly very messed up physically and mentally, and Brielle ends up being battered to an inch of her life and being subjugated by this couple who have loads of other thralls as well, and she becomes a thrall to this couple, cleaning the wife's wounds and feeding her and looking after her and stuff, all the while sort of hating her and wanting to kill her. This whole part is excellent. Brielle is just a child, really, and she's stuck in this awful situation that's straight out of The Hills Have Eyes or something. It's like a horror movie at this point. Really, really good, full of nasty abuse and just horrible violence, and just nasty, stinking descriptions of everything in the Underhive. And I've got to say, it's some really good writing here as well. Anyway, she's taken captive by this sort of runaway couple, and yeah, she's working sewage. There's one point where she is forced to go into a sort of sewage thing and pull out some maggot-encrusted corpses and stuff to sort of clear the filter and stuff, and it's just really gross the way that it's described. Anyway, she gets visited by a rogue doc who used to be part of the Escher sort of family that she used to be part of, and this rogue doc comes along and to help out the Orlok wife, and he recognizes her, and he ends up helping her escape, kind of. So she escapes with this rogue doc, and in the process she kills the woman as well, pulls out her life support machine sockets and sort of kills her and lets her die very slowly. And she escapes and ends up being taken to this area where there's a giant spider, which she nearly gets killed by. She then gets saved by a group of people called the Family, who are pretty much a bunch of outcasts who follow a guy called Solomon, who is an interesting character. He is a very, very powerful psychic character, and he is their leader. So they're all terrified of him, and he leads them all by fear, pretty much. And when she encounters Solomon, he pretty much gets in her brain and sort of complains about his life and his struggles, and kind of gives all of his followers the sense of despair and failure and horrible times that he's had in his life to try and make them sympathize with him. And he's a really, really cool, very interesting character. He's got an albino spider that sort of runs around him all the time and acts like a sort of psychic node as well. But really he's just this little decrepit man that's all hooked up to some wires with a very powerful mind. Anyway, there's a sort of mutie horde battle at one point where the muties try and rise up, and the family has to try and stop them. At this point, Brielle becomes a kind of like warrior in their family, and sort of earns some fighting skills and some Underhive knowledge as well. But yeah, they then meet a Goliath scouting party where Brielle rips a demo charge through a corpse's abdomen to beat them, which is quite interesting. She seems to have gone from being a little poor little girl who's very in trouble and very naive and not very able to handle herself to being a fully fledged warrior in the blink of an eye. The pace seems to move quite quickly at this point. Anyway, Solomon, the adult baby, is obviously very powerful, and he freaks out when he delves into Brielle's mind and figures out that she used to be an Escher and that she's got all this baggage that came with her as well. So that she then escapes barely by being pursued by members of the family in the process, and she escapes back to where she came from. And then the next act, I would say, is kind of disappointing. It feels very rushed. The last third of the book turns into what I would say is sort of a western with bar fights and smoking guns, and again very cheesy named characters and very rushed, it feels, unfortunately. It feels a bit like a cop-out. She kills the killer of her mother in a bar by disemboweling him very gruesomely. And then Brielle then goes back to her old gang, and they're all weak and lazy, and she challenges the leader, and then leaves with 10 of her own Jews to form her own gang called the Black Widows, which she gives them all spiderweb tattoos on their faces, which is all very cliche as well. They then start taking back their turf, but at this point the pace is moving a little too fast and the cheese is creeping back. Brielle suddenly becomes Spider-Woman and can pretty much control them using her mind and by manipulating spiders' webs and stuff at this point. She wipes out an Orlok gang, she wipes out a Goliath gang just using spiders at this point. The Escher all moot up and agree to attack the Goliaths after very little persuasion at all, which is super contradictory as well because this involves some Ghast, but you'll have to read it to really see what I'm saying there. But basically it turns out that Fetnir, the Goliath leader, is a Ghast addict, and that's how he's become so powerful, is that he can kind of see the future and see what's going to happen, which is quite interesting for a Goliath leader, I suppose. But of course Brielle starts taking Ghast as well and is able to sort of predict what's going to happen. But they attack the Goliaths, and they're typical sort of boring brutes, basically with no interesting qualities. Fetnir, the tyrant, turns out to be pretty dull as well, and very stereotypical for the Goliaths there as well. Brielle then leaves to where her mother used to hide out and chill for a bit, and finally she mounts another assault on Fetnir and kills him. Yeah. She then goes back and becomes queen after having a death match with her main rival. I can't remember what the main rival's name is, but again, not a very interesting character. She becomes sort of fatally poisoned in the process, though. There's the rival has a whip, and she manages to kill the rival very gruesomely, but in the process gets cut with this poisoned whip, and then interestingly ends up turning into the woman that she was looking after and then killed when she was in the Underhive. So she becomes sort of quadraspased on a life glug, as Chris Morris would say, on a sort of life support machine, pretty much hooked up on a life support machine and wanting revenge. And that is where the book ends. So in summary, it's a really perplexing, quite frustrating book with some incredibly good bits and some mostly mediocre bits. So I'd say that I'd divide it into 3 parts. The first and third parts being pretty dull, pretty predictable, and the characters being kind of cheesy and annoying. But then you have this middle part when she goes into the Underhive, and it is just fantastic. It's really well written. The pace is much slower, and it's just more interesting in a lot of ways. And it's very dark. And the main character, you know, being more vulnerable and scared is far more believable than her being all tough and big and Puss in Boots, basically. I feel like the third part is very rushed, like I said. Most of the characters did not interest me, except for Lola and her husband, which are the 2 Orloks as well. And of course Solomon, the weird, who was pretty cool as well. But yeah, the Goliaths were so painfully simple, it hurt, and the Escher overall I found quite annoying and corny. Overall, I'd say this is a very average to sort of low-brow attempt in Black Library. I don't really know the author. I haven't read any of his other books, and no disrespect to the author at all. I'm going to have to just be completely honest here in my reviews, because it is what it is. You know, there are some really, really good moments in this book, don't get me wrong, and to be honest, I don't regret reading this book at all. If you had that middle part of the Underhive section of the book as a short story, it would have been better, I think, or if that was just elaborated on, I would absolutely lap that up, because I found it very hard to put that down at all. But overall, Terminal Overkill is a frustrating book, as it has some really great moments, but it lacks consistency and it lacks some depth, and the majority of it is not good at all. I'm going to give it out of 10. I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. I think if it wasn't for that middle bit, it would probably be getting a 3. But that middle bit is so good that it bumps it up to over average there. So 6 out of 10 for Terminal Overkill. I hope you enjoyed that. If you've read it, I'd really like to know what your thoughts are on this. I've seen some very mixed reviews. Some people seem to love this book. Some people seem to think it's garbage. But I would suggest reading it for the middle part alone. I think that's excellent. The other parts you can pretty much skip. And you won't be missing much at all. But that's it for now. Please do like, share, subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next book review. Peace out.